Doing wheel bearings and brake pads on my Chevy 3500. Also gonna change an oil and filter, but I already did that. All right, it's a 22. Well, actually, it's a 22 to pull the fake hubcap off, and then a 22 to break the nuts, and then take them off, get the wheel off. For the caliper bolt, it's an Allen. Can't see through the phone. 3/8 Allen socket. You gotta get those 2 brake bolts right there, and then you gotta spread the brake pads a little bit, and then it'll come right off. Obviously, putting some new pads on because they're gone. When I tried to get the parts, they told me I had to bring the old ones in because it's hard to find on these. I actually have the unit with no back. The newer ones have 3 bolts, easier to replace but way more expensive. This one has just a shaft, and you pull out to get this little cap off. This guy right here sets over the nut and the grease. I just took a little flathead screwdriver, put it on each side, and kind of just popped it out with a hammer. Really easy. And now I'm going to take this circlip off, and then take the nut off, slide it off, and I'll video that after I get it done. I'll let you know what size nut it is as well. Alright, so I got the circlip off, and then I took the nut off. It's a 30mm nut with a washer behind it, so you get that off. It might be a little tricky pulling the hub off, just because, a little rusty or whatnot, so I just kept pulling on it, quite a few times, eventually come off. It's just the needle bearings and the race. There's, and then there's a dust seal right here. So this is all the new parts. And so what I'm gonna go ahead and do, see, these are easy. They just slide right in. This is the inner and the outer. And then you have the races, and this is what you have to beat in. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick these in the freezer to make them easier. And I'll wait on it. I'll go ahead and put the dust seal in too. It just helps go in a lot easier because I'm gonna have to beat the old ones out. And then when those are frozen and cold, it'll slide right in a lot easier. So I'll have to beat them in gently and carefully because you don't want to damage where the bearing rides on, which is right here. Alright, so this little vise I have rigged up on the back of my hitch. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pop this dust seal out with my little pry bar. Might need 2 hands. Let's see if I can do it with one. Yep, one popped it right out. We're going to replace that, and see, now I can pull this needle bearing out. Say mine had a little bit of play and was starting to make some noise, so I just went ahead and replaced it before it got real bad. We'll just set that right there. Alright, see, now I have the 2 races, and I have sharpened punches, longer one, flat edge, and I'm going to put it down here and knock the bottom and flip it over and then knock that one out. Okay, here's my punch. I just sharpen a little bit, make sure it's nice and sharp. It's going to stay on there. There's my hammer. What you're going to do is you're going to take it and put it right on that race. And you're probably going to have to work, so I'm going to tap it here, move it directly across, tap it, and just keep working it out. And see, it goes down, and then this one's going to have to come out this way. Those are the old races. Just got my new race seal and other races out of the freezer. I just put some grease on them. I'm using some waterproof grease, very good stuff. Make sure you always grease up your seal. Everything goes together when lubricated. Alright, so I'm going to set this in here. See how it just kind of pushes all the way down in there? See? Sometimes they won't be so easy, but this one definitely was. So that one's all the way down up against it. Now I'm going to turn it over and do the other one. Alright, so this is the larger race. I put it in, then tapped it lightly around with my hammer to got it flush. I'm going to put the old bearing in there and kind of tap it around and get it all the way seated. I don't want to use my new bearing because I don't want to mess it up. So I'm going to use the old one. Alright, so I used the old bearing of the inner and outer and just stacked them on top of each other and kind of tapped it in with my hammer. Seated right in easily. New race is in. Now I can throw these away because they're done. Alright, so don't put your seal, your new oil, your grease seal, don't put your new dust seal in until you put the bearing in. And then we're going to make sure, we're going to coat this thing with grease, because that's going to be the only lubrication it's getting. So lots and lots of grease on all this. Put it in, then dust seal. Alright, got the new dust seal, new bearing, the inner bearing all greased up and everything. I'm going to clean this off, put some new grease on it, then we'll slide this on, and then we'll put the outer bearing on. Alright, so I pushed the outer up to it, and then I had to, it was a little tight on the shaft, so I used my hammer and kind of tapped it all the way around. Pretty hard, you had to give it some love. to get the bearing, the new bearing, the inner bearing onto the shaft. So I held it up, I kept this center and held it even, and then tapped with my big hammer. I didn't tap it, I hit it all the way around it until it pushed all the way back. So you gotta make sure this goes all the way back and there's no gap right there. And then the new bearing, you know, make sure it's fully greased, slid right in, no problem. So now I'm gonna put my nut and washer with a 30 mil socket and tighten that up. Make sure you don't go too tight, make sure everything still spins freely. And then your cotter key lines up, and then put a new cotter pin in. All right, got it all snugged up now. I went as tight as I could with my large impact, 1/2 inch impact. Made sure it was tight. It did not move after I tightened it up. I wanted to kind of make sure everything was snug, so I tightened it as far as it would go. It wouldn't budge anymore. I backed it up just a little bit till it lined up, and I could spin it freely. So you don't want it, you know, I highly recommend using the correct torque, but I kind of do it this way. Cotter pin in. Now I'm going to put the cap back on and then do my brakes. Also, you see all my fingerprints and grease and everything all in the rotors. Definitely take a rag and some brake cleaner, and I'm going to clean the rotors off backside and front, and just kind of clean it up, make sure I don't leave any grease hanging out, because you don't want any lubricant on your brake pads. That will make you not stop. Alright, so that is one wheel bearing and brake pads done. I didn't really show a video on the brake pads just because I wanted to make it about wheel bearings, but put the wheel back on. While it's up in the air, I put it in, and then I use my air gun and just kind of go all the way around, snug it up, and then I set it lightly on the ground so the wheel won't move, and then I tighten it down with a breaker bar, so these babies ain't coming off.